Hey everybody, welcome to Monday. And we're going to be talking today about has the definition of video game RPGs become so loose, so dilute that it's no longer useful. And I'm going to apologize in advance if I space in a few places and lose my train of thought. I dared to go meet up with a few friends over the weekend for the first time since I think COVID started. I don't remember. Certainly not going downtown Toronto since COVID started. And sure enough, some individual smoked weed right outside the restaurant. It wafted into the restaurant. I am super allergic to marijuana. I'm allergic to a bunch of like trees and grasses and stuff like that, but weed has a really, really bad effect on me. And one of the things it does is it makes me like space for days afterwards. I get really dizzy. My face all breaks out. You probably can't see it on the video, but it's quite bad here. I get nauseous. I get dizzy. I have a whole bunch of issues. And it takes me 3 or 4 days to feel totally okay again. So I'm going to do my best here. But there's the caveat. So I'm aware this is really wonky. And I'm also not sure where I land on this. And I find things go better. People get less agitated when I take this approach. It's here's what I'm mulling over. What do you think? Instead of doing that thing you're supposed to do, which is take a firm stance one way or the other because you're supposed to be persuasive and that's doing it right. And this isn't academic writing. This is my YouTube channel. I'm going to do it the way I want to do it and the way I find it works best. Yes, I'm not going to get the hate clicks this way, but I don't care about that. I'd rather a good conversation. So if you like this sort of thing that does not chase clicks and so gets less traffic, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K for ongoing monthly support, or one-time donations at coffee.com/Leanna K, $25, buy a Leanna K session for somebody who can use it but can't afford it. We need 3 every week to keep it going. You've been super generous so far. The coffee thing's working out really great. So let's keep it going if you can and choose to. No pressure, right? Obviously, I just got to do this because this is the game. This is the part of the game I will do. The chasing traffic I will not do. Okay, so video game RPGs. This came about because you guys saw I played Far Cry 6 and really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good open world action adventure first person shooter. And then now I'm playing Horizon Forbidden West. And I think it's a really good open world action adventure third person shooter. Except Horizon Forbidden West is called an action RPG. Now, I have issues with how video games are sorted to begin with. I think that the collapse of the concept of genre has become an issue when describing video games. I use the term ludogenre to refer to the type of game something is, right? Genre is genre to me. So ludogenre is something like action adventure or role-playing game or survival game or first-person shooter, third-person shooter. It actually describes the form of gameplay. Visual novel, point-and-click adventure game. It tells you how it plays. But that doesn't completely describe the game, right? And this is where things get really messy. Genre in other mediums have different sorts of genres. There's structure, tragedy, comedy, allegory, parody, satire, right? But then there's, romantic comedy, musical, crime, horror, war movie, Western, and then there's the nonfiction genres. And the problem that games have is there's the gameplay, which is what's under the hood. And then there's what color the proverbial car is, right? So, Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption, similar gameplay mechanics in some ways, just like Fallout and Elder Scrolls, similar gameplay mechanics in some ways, very different artistic genres, right? The crime, modern crime versus Western, epic fantasy versus sci-fi, and those matter too. And the problem is, in order to describe a game, there are so many words, and some things get mashed up, right? Like survival horror is seen as its own genre. But then there's survival action, and then there's just straight up survival, and it's all just, what do these terms mean? And I really firmly believe that a lot of the fights that go on, that get really, really heated in gaming, actually come down to not properly defining your terminologies before you begin to speak. And the reason I do this, the reason I think this, is even when I define a term, within like an hour of the video dropping, I have some helpful commenter telling me that's not what the term means. And it's like, I defined how I was using it, but people are so wedded to these definitions. They are super important for some odd reason that people control what words mean instead of just accepting that someone else may not use a word the same way you do. As long as you know how they're using the word, I think that's okay. But I gotta know chunks of information, which was what a meme used to be, need to have some form of meaning, or else we just have this chain of floating abstractions and communication gets lost, right? And I've been having a lot of discussions about the inherent qualities of an RPG. And the standard definition of an RPG, the thing that makes it an RPG, is that it has some sort of character evolution through statistics. But when you think about that, that is not why most people who like the RPG genre play RPGs. They don't necessarily care about leveling. Why? Well, because leveling's been borrowed from so many genres that it's no longer something that is a clearly defined element that an RPG has, right? Unlike, an open world game, we know what an open world game is. It's this big ass map, and you're not, you may be funneled a little bit, but you can go anywhere, and some things may be unlocked, but you're not tunneled. We know what an open world game is, right? We know what a tactical strategy game is. It can be turn-based or real-time, but there are actual elements of a tactical strategy game that make it a tactical strategy game. Survival games are about staying alive, right? I go back to my Far Cry 6 versus Horizon Forbidden West comparison. Far Cry 6 does not call itself an RPG, and yet it has a leveling and gear system. You collect gear to make your character stronger, and you do level. And that level means something, you get more health, you get access to better guns, all that stuff. So the leveling system as a form of character evolution is no longer useful in describing to somebody what's an RPG and why will I like it, right? What most people think of when it comes to a Western RPG is the ability to talk to people, have some say in the conversation, and, you know, different midpoints, different endings, party members you get to know, all that stuff. Now, that's the stuff that Horizon Forbidden West does quite poorly. The dialogue is overwritten and really super boring. You can emote to a few characters, but who cares? Because it doesn't matter how you respond to the different guys throwing themselves at Aloy. She's not going to get with anybody. You can't make her. Like, what was even the point? To me, it just feels like torturing these guys. I might talk about that more tomorrow. But, you know, the RPG elements are actually what people think of as an RPG element are weak. The ability to control the world, the ability to, you know, make friends with various characters and have relationships with them and get to know them and all that stuff. Those are thin in Horizon Forbidden West. But the leveling system with the skill trees and everything like that is extremely developed. So is Horizon Forbidden West, by sort of textbook definition, an action RPG? Absolutely. But is that what people who consider themselves fans of RPGs like Mass Effect or Dragon Age or The Witcher or, you know, even something like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which is still sort of an open world action game, but it has RPG elements in it that are in many ways more robust than what Horizon Forbidden West did? This is the problem, that if somebody really liked The Witcher 3 or Dragon Age and went, oh, okay, this is an RPG, I'm going to try this, there's not going to be the things they liked in those other games. Even though there's, you know, I guess an element of hack and slashy in there. There's no real ability to, like, yes, you can do side quests and yes, you can help people and things like that. But for me, it doesn't feel terribly meaningful. At least not yet. And yet, that is not the only form of RPG out there, right? We have Japanese RPGs, which tend to have parties. So do Western RPGs, but The Witcher doesn't. So, you know, that is not something like Fable or something like The Witcher doesn't have a party. So party structure, having multiple characters under your control, is also not a innate requirement of an RPG. Now, Japanese RPGs, when you think about, you know, Final Fantasy VII Remake, for instance, though that's gone more action. I guess Japanese RPGs, you still have the ability to make friends and control the plot and all that stuff. It's done differently, and the leveling is done differently and everything like that. But when you think about the original Final Fantasy VII, yeah, you did have some say over mid-game things, like whether you decided to go on a date with Yuffie or Yuffie or however her name's pronounced and things like that. But Japanese RPGs don't have the branching narratives the same way, mostly. I don't see what I mean. Like, I'm sitting here, yes, some do, yes, some don't. The lines where RPG cuts off and sort of story-driven action-adventure combat game, the line is very blurred. And that makes it really hard to, first of all, set expectations as to whether someone's going to like a game, especially if they buy it at full price. But you also get into these definitional fights, which we can avoid, right? There's always going to be some subjectivity in whether someone's going to like a game or not. But we can do better defining terms so that people don't spend all this time. Remember, 5 or so years ago when the "it's not a game" fight happened, and it was a definition of victory conditions and fail states, and whether fail states were a requirement for a video game. And the thing is, hard fail states have not necessarily been a requirement for quite some time, because as far back, the first time I remember a soft lock in a video game was playing in the 90s. Was it King's Quest 6? Was it 6? I don't know, the one with all the different islands. That had a few deliberate soft locks. So it wasn't a hard fail state, it wasn't reload save. You just couldn't progress if you screwed something up. That was considered innovative back in the day. Obviously that mutation did not continue its line. Oh my God, could you imagine soft locking somebody on a 100-hour game? Nowadays, you wouldn't do that. Though you do have to figure out ways to proceed. And, a great many puzzle games are like that. You don't fail. You just can't progress until you solve another puzzle. Like, okay, yes, you sometimes fail a puzzle, but often it's just, there's a combination lock or something and you have to figure out the combination. And if you don't figure out the combination, you can't proceed. Welcome to Myst. The first time I played Myst, I was expecting things to jump out and kill me all the time because those were the games I was used to. So I had this real sense of tension of, oh my God, something's going to jump out at me. It must. It can't just be, it's all just puzzles. Okay, now I'm chill. But yeah, even something like, Maniac Mansion, characters can get soft locked, but then you can sort of, rescue them and things like that. But there were so many people going, there's no fail states, there's no victory condition, it's not a game. And I guess that's why some people use the term interactive entertainment. But like I said, hard fail states, BioShock doesn't technically, yes, you run out of health and you respawn, but there's really no penalty. Right? It's a fail state in name only because of the philosophy of the design of that game. We don't have really good firm definitions of things. And on the one hand, I think it's good for creativity. On the other, you can't be creative when you're afraid that your consumer base is going to freak out and rebel on you because there was a miscommunication in terms of setting expectations in your product. And that's anytime you work on anything creative, that's always a risk. The first 2 episodes of Boss Fight, a lot of people were disappointed, even though I described meticulously what the differences between Lady Bits and Boss Fight were going to be. But other people were like, no, it's exactly what you said it was going to be. It was going to be more characters, less information. And there were really good reasons for that. Big part of it is most video game myths, burden of proof is on the accuser and they don't have any. So all you have to go is not proven. Not going to be a very long show. But people still didn't get what was going on there, despite my best attempts to communicate very clearly what I was planning on doing with that series. Some of that can't be controlled. People read in what they want to see instead of what's there. But I do think we can do better in terms of definitions and in recognizing that definitions do change. The one I always struggle with is Mary Sue, because when I first learned what that term meant, a requirement for something to be a Mary Sue is, one, it had to be fan fiction, but also it had to be an author self-insert character. Now that definition is shifted. And I think that's part of the huge fight surrounding characters like, female characters people don't like Rey from Star Wars. Because when I first what? That was a guy that was J.J. Abrams that first made that movie. How is that a self-insert character? That's not what a Mary Sue means. Okay. Woohoo. I don't want to have that fight. I don't want to fight over what words mean. It just seems like a preventable waste of time. Let's figure out a definition that we can agree on and then test that definition. But that's not how the culture war works. The culture war works by two or more factions jealously attempting to control what language and imagery and art and media mean. That's why it is a culture war. And it's a minority screaming at the majority because they take a concept and torque it so that it's no longer useful and use that as a weapon to get people to shut up and do what they want. The only way to stop that, to tone it down, is to use words that have inherent meanings. And this is why I struggle, going back to the topic of the video, it's all been on topic, but going back to the core of it, why I struggle to define what a role-playing game now is. Because does it mean sort of the textbook definition, going back to what the original Dungeons and Dragons was intended to be when Gary Gygax first came up with it, which was an adaptation of war miniatures. Gary Gygax was very intent on the rules being really, really important in tabletop role-playing. But come second edition AD&D, it was a performative, interactive storytelling medium that you played with your friends, right? More and more, the dice rolls became less and less important. And, worlds like Forgotten Realms became the thing that drew people to it. The same thing's happening in video games. The idea of an RPG being a character that levels and stats and gear and spells and so on and so forth, that's almost secondary now for people who are fans of RPGs, because fans of RPGs, like I said, want a really engaging story and simulated social interactions, the romances, the control over the world, the different endings to individual quests, the different endings to the game. And I don't think that big multiple branching endings are super essential. Because when you think about, say, Mass Effect 2, the big fight was the big fight. It was who lived and who died that was the thing that you could control. But there was so much along the way before you got to that point. It was like, okay, there's meaningful role-playing elements, right? The genre is not called stats and loot. It's called role-playing. And I think the borrowing from tabletop is part of the issue here, because a lot of other terminologies from games come from movies, and, literary genres, whereas role-playing actually comes from a different form of game, right? And that may be the issue, as the idea of genre and ludo-genre have merged. The actual gameplay elements there's been a real push towards everything has to be action oriented in RPGs. I miss turn-based RPGs. I'm glad they're coming back because it gave people who were predominantly interested in the story an ability to stop and think and plan their moves out, much more like the old pen and paper role-playing games, though you didn't want to bore your friends. But, reaction time was not a requirement. But the story was. If you ask people why they like playing Dungeons and Dragons, this was one of the things I talked with my friends over the weekend. They didn't talk about, the dice rolls and the stats and all that stuff. No, they talked about the funny things that happened in the game. The DM had this big elaborate monologue planned, and the first thing one of his players did was go in and cast silence. Well, that's out the window. Somebody cast darkness. Well, you can't use all your fancy descriptions you prepared, right? I mean, that's what they laugh about, the experience. And that's what I think people imagine when they hear role-playing game, right? And I mean, why do people like Dragon Age Inquisition, Dragon Age? All the games, not because the combat is shit hot great. I don't know of anybody who played Dragon Age and went, wow, I really loved my loot and leveling in those games. No, they like the story. They like the interactivity of the story. They like the characters and interacting with the characters. Same thing with The Witcher. Yeah, I found the different armor sets funny. I like to make Geralt look as stupid as possible. But it was the moral decision making in a very ambivalent world that I really enjoyed about that game. The combat in Witcher 3 was the best of the bunch, but there was still the magic system and the potion system, the mutagens, never quite clicked with me, and I didn't end up using the drinks all that much. Though, like I said, 3 worked a lot of the glitches out. But it was the stories, it was the choices, it was the figuring out who you were going to side with and how you felt about this both bleak and colorful world that they created based on the books. And that's what role-playing game means in real terms to people. And that's why my concern with something like Horizon Forbidden West, on paper, yes, it's got stats and it's got leveling and it's got gear. But the role-playing element of the role-playing game is missing. And if people buy it because it's a role-playing game, they're going to be sorely disappointed, right? Because you don't really have a ton of control. Aloy doesn't really have a ton of meaningful attachment. She's all mission. So is the original definition useful? And then the question is, what do we do about that, right? Do we revert to the original definition? I think the horse is out of the barn on that one because so many open world action games have taken things like leveling and loot and all that stuff and made that part of open world action. It's not a defining quality of Western RPGs, certainly anymore. Or do we recognize this definition has changed and recognize that when we use role-playing game, that creates an expectation that isn't stats and loot, right? It's the ability to impact the world. It's branching narratives. It's multiple party members that you can befriend and learn about and so on and so forth. What do you guys think? I'm really, really curious about what you come back with here. Help support this channel and this sort of content. Become a monthly patron at patreon.com/LeannaK or one-time Leanna Cares donated sessions on coffee.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.